Okay, so a very warm welcome to everyone. Welcome back to the EVA Alumni Talk series. This is our second installment for this fall. And as many of you know, we started this new series with the intention of providing a platform for some of our alumni of the European Varela Awards program at MLE. And so we've had the pleasure of hearing already from Tarja Sparby last month. And today we're going to be hearing from Michelle Carr, who was awarded the European Varela Award in 2017, so one of the earliest cohorts of awardees. And this is really the occasion for us as well at MLE to disseminate the findings from contemplative science research to a wider audience and to hear a little bit about the trajectory of some of the younger researchers in this community. So I will proceed to just briefly introduce Michelle, who will be talking to us this evening about her research into the experience and treatment of nightmares, which promises to be a really fascinating topic, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. We will have time for questions in the latter part of the evening, so start thinking about questions you might have during the talk, and you can post them in the chat, or you can also just raise your hand near the end. So Michelle Carr will be starting in 2023 as the co-director of the Dream and Nightmare Laboratory in the Center for Advanced Research in Sleep Medicine in Montreal, and will be an adjunct research professor in psychiatry at the University of Montreal. She studies the relationship between dreams and mental health, with a particular interest in nightmares, lucid dreams, and new techniques in dream engineering. So with that, we will hand over the floor to you, Michelle, to get us started. And thank you very much for offering this talk this evening.
Thank you. Okay, so you can see and hear me okay? Okay,
great.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to speak today. I received the Varela Award in 2017, and I really appreciated the support from Mind and Life Europe and the contemplative research community. So I'm excited to share my work with you today. And to give a bit more background on my kind of career trajectory, I started at the University of Rochester in New York, doing my undergraduate degree in cognitive science and psychology. And I was also had the opportunity to be a research assistant at the sleep lab in Rochester. And during my time as a research assistant, I had my first ever lucid dream, which is where you become aware of the fact that you're dreaming while you're in a dream. And all of these factors just kind of coalesced into this building fascination with how our mind and our brain is capable of producing these very vivid dream worlds while we're asleep. And to my surprise, I discovered that the Dream and Nightmare Laboratory existed, and went on to do my graduate work with Tori Nielsen at this lab in Montreal, and started to focus more on nightmares. And I'll talk a lot about my PhD project on the neurocognitive science of nightmares today. And I then went and did a postdoc with Mark Blagrove, another dream researcher in the UK. And this is when I also got a Varela Award and conducted a study also on the neurocognitive science of nightmares. And I'll go into a lot of detail on that study and our findings. And while I was in the UK and in Europe, I was able to visit a lot of other researchers. And I just wanted to list some of them here because I think it's a really exciting time to be a dream researcher. There seems to be building interest in the field and a lot of really great mentors and opportunities to join the field. So after that postdoc, I actually returned to Rochester, the same lab where I worked as an undergraduate, started studying more psychiatry and other kind of clinical implications of nightmares. And as Johanna said, I'll be returning to the Dream and Nightmare Lab in early 2023 as a co-director. So I'm following a very cyclical career path here. So what have I been studying over the years? I've worked a lot on fundamental dream science. So what are the potential functions of dreams? How do dreams impact waking life, memory, creativity, emotion, general well-being? And then especially what happens when dreaming is disrupted. So in the case of nightmares, exploring how nightmares impact sleep and waking function. And then finally, how we can treat nightmares and perform other dream interventions to improve well-being. This isn't the focus of my talk, but I just want to give kind of some brief overview of fundamental dream science. And I will start, so just to cover some studies that I've worked on that demonstrate that dreaming frequently incorporates waking life experience, and these patterns of incorporation may reflect some underlying functions of sleep and potentially dreaming in consolidating memory and processing emotional experiences. So I'm going to start with a video.
Rachel Rader is getting wired for sleep.
The ones on the back of the head are the hardest.
She's about to go lights out as part of an experiment. That's why Rachel Rader is here. Prior to her nap, as seen here, she was asked to study sign language to see if her recall will improve after sleep and dreaming.
So this is actually a very typical protocol in dream research and in sleep research more generally, that we have people come into the sleep lab, they perform a task prior to sleep, and then they, in this case, they took a nap. And in dream research, we wake them up for dream reports, and then they perform the task again following sleep. And we look for correspondences between what they dream about and how they perform after sleep. And in this study particularly, and in another study I worked on in Montreal, we've shown that people who dream more about the lab, so lab-related dreams, are performing better on the task, in this case, sign language recall after sleep. And to give a couple examples of lab-related dreams, one is everyone working at the lab was there and they were trying to find different ways of getting me to sleep, but it wasn't working. There was even a time during the dream where I would be very close to falling asleep, but then random pieces of trash would fall on my head. And another participant reports, the study is over and I'm asking the researcher if they saw what happened because it felt crazy. And she started drawing charts on how my sleep went from low cerebral level to super high. And then I was going to the bathroom and I was getting lost in the sleep lab. So in general, this finding suggests that what we're dreaming about is in some way related to memory consolidation during sleep. And in this case, incorporating the environment of the lab or potentially elements of the task itself is corresponding with a better performance following sleep. So potentially a memory consolidation function of dreaming. But another idea is that when we incorporate recent experience into a dream, it's not just replayed in an episodic way. It's kind of integrated and associated with other related memories or related elements. So our mind is kind of making connections between recent experience and similar things from our autobiography. So I'll give one more example here.
All right. Hey, Michelle. Would you tell us your dream?
Okay, at the beginning of the dream, I was in bed here and I was trying to fall asleep and a little gray cat came in onto the bed, but actually it was Lisa. And Lisa was telling me it was time to get up.
So this is a dream I had when I was a participant in my colleague Elizaveta Solomanova's study. And in the dream, so Lisa is actually the experimenter. This is a picture of Lisa. So in the dream, Lisa appears, but she shows up as a gray cat. And this might be related to the fact that in my typical life, my gray cat, Senna, wakes me up every morning. So my dream is kind of forming this association between Lisa, who wakes me up in the lab, and my gray cat, who wakes me up at home. And this is something that a lot of dream researchers comment on, this very bizarre nature that we see of dreams. It might just be that our dreams are forming these associations between different aspects of our waking life and kind of forming novel combinations and integrating our memory, integrating experience into our memory networks. And lastly, something dream research talk about a lot is the possible function of dreams in processing emotion and adapting to emotional experiences. And I'll just show a model briefly. This is actually by Matt Walker, who's a sleep researcher, called the sleep to forget, sleep to remember model. And the idea is essentially that REM sleep might serve a function not only in consolidating and integrating salient experiences, so saving those memories that are important to us, but also regulating our emotions so that we're not so, like when we recall an emotional experience, we're not so distressed when we recall it as we were when we experienced it the first time. And dream researchers talk about this too as a potential overnight therapy process of dreaming, that when we dream about something, it's maybe helping us to adapt and to process to what could have been a negative waking life experience. And I'm not gonna, I decided not to describe this study in detail, but suffice it to say, there have been a few experiments that I've conducted and others that do have some support for this theory, that when we dream about things that are concerning us or things that are unpleasant or negative in waking life, we actually feel better about them subsequently. So we feel less negative when we recall the experience later. So just to summarize there, dreams seem to incorporate waking life experiences and perhaps integrate them into our memory networks, helping us to consolidate memory, but also potentially regulate our emotional response to emotional memories. And there's always a question of whether dreams are simply reflecting or correlating with underlying sleep functions, or whether dreams are actively contributing in some way. And there's a chapter that I wrote with Lisa and about the fact that the dreamer, through being a conscious and feeling active participant in a dream, is actually guiding dream creation in some way through feeling, through reacting to the dream, through directing attention in a dream, through behaviorally responding in a dream. You're guiding the content of the dream and potentially underlying functions of sleep as well. And this is relevant, especially when we start to look at nightmares too. So yeah, so in this section, I'm going to go into detail about some work I did during my PhD, testing the neurocognitive model of nightmares, which is a model that my supervisor, Tori Nielsen, developed. And it kind of builds on the last section, again, talking about how nightmares might be triggered by adverse waking life experiences and how chronic nightmares are associated with emotion regulation. So to just give an overview of the neurocognitive model first, it postulates that bad dreams and even idiopathic nightmares are a normal response to waking stress and potentially serve this function in helping us to adapt to negative experiences. But as nightmares become more frequent and more distressing, they can develop into a psychopathology. So about 5% of the population experiences nightmares on a weekly basis that are severely interrupting sleep and distressing in waking life. And so this is considered nightmare disorder. And the neurocognitive model is generally like a diathesis stress model, which basically just says that certain individuals are more vulnerable or have a trait that makes them prone to experiencing this kind of negative kind of cycle between having adverse experiences with waking life and experiencing nightmares during sleep. And there's specific terminology. It's probably not important to know the terms specifically, but basically just claims that people high in trait affect distress are prone to experiencing nightmares and to developing this kind of psychopathology of maintaining nightmares and having worse sleep and worse emotion regulation. And there's also a neural level of description, and it focuses on several brain regions. So part of it is about reactivating emotional experiences and integrating novel elements that are not negative. So kind of trying to replay an emotional memory in a less negative context. That part's not as relevant to my talk today, but the other part of the model is focusing on more frontal regions of the brain, like the anterior cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex, and how they serve a role in regulating emotional arousal. And here it's thought to, when functional, it regulates arousal during sleep and during dreams, and also during waking life. And so people who are prone to nightmares are thought to have kind of impaired emotion regulation. And this leads to more intense nightmares, more disturbed sleep, more waking distress. And it's just kind of this vicious cycle. So we set out to test this when I was a PhD student and recruited nightmare subjects, which are subjects who had at least 2 bad dreams or 1 nightmare per week. And control subjects had to have less than 1 nightmare per month. They completed some questionnaire measures about nightmares, their distress and frequency, and also a traumatic antecedents or antecedents questionnaire, which I'll describe next. And then a couple of tasks testing for this regulatory dysfunction that's hypothesized by the neurocognitive model. So the initial questionnaire part of the study, using this traumatic antecedents questionnaire, which is basically a very thorough questionnaire that asks about all types of adverse experiences you've had across your life, but also breaking it into different segments of your life. And one thing that we found, which many others have found, is that people who have more nightmares in adult life seem to have been exposed to more adversity across their lifespan. But one thing that we added from this was just this new finding that there even seems to be a difference emerging as early as 0 to 6 years. So Tori has continued with this work at looking at how early childhood adversity is related to nightmares in adult life. And we can also look at kind of the themes of nightmares, and nightmare sufferers very typically have recurring nightmares. So the same theme repeats over and over again. And in some cases, they might be able to trace this theme to a specific adverse event that happened when they were younger. It could be a trauma event, of course, but maybe just something, a lower level adversity. And sometimes they can't trace it to a specific event, but it's interesting to see how these themes can recur throughout their entire life and be triggered by other types of stressors in waking life. And in the case of kind of idiopathic nightmares, they're not really replaying an adverse event. So I give an example here. Someone reports that they started having this nightmare theme after their parents separated, but the theme of the nightmare might be that they're being cheated on by their partner. Another person reported after their parents separated, they had this theme of falling into emptiness. So it's not like replaying an adverse event, it's kind of metaphorically or symbolically representing an adverse experience. Okay, so moving into the first task that we did. So the verbal fluency task is supposed to be a test of executive function, which is kind of this regulatory, self-regulatory function. And it asks participants, it gives them 60 seconds, and you have to list as many words, either starting with a certain letter or within a certain category as you can in 1 minute as possible. But critically, you're not supposed to repeat any words. And so when you repeat yourself, this is kind of evidence of executive dysfunction, that you're failing to inhibit or to regulate your responses. And this was actually a replication study. So in 2012, Peter Simor's group in Hungary demonstrated that nightmare sufferers have more of these perseveration errors. They fail to inhibit repetitive responses. And we replicated it nearly exactly in 2018. So it's behavioral evidence of frontal dysregulation, essentially, supporting the model. And then we did a neuroimaging task as well. So we did this in a subset of 18 nightmare subjects. And during 8 minutes, they were essentially just being exposed to negative pictures, which was intended to kind of increase the state of negative arousal. And at the end of that, they were injected with a radio tracer and then went into this SPECT imaging machine, which essentially can detect how the radio tracer dispersed, and through that kind of estimate changes in blood flow and where blood flow is changing while they were in this state of negative arousal. So I won't go into too much detail, but we found 2 sets of findings, basically that in this group of subjects, people who have higher nightmare distress, So the more nightmare distress you have, the less activation we were seeing in some of these regions of the brain associated with emotion regulation. So specifically, cingulate cortex and medial and inferior frontal cortex, and also insula and putamen. And we just found essentially similar things when we looked at bad dream frequencies. So people who recall more bad dreams have less activation in similar emotion regulation areas, like the medial frontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex, which is in alignment with the model as well. So in general, these patterns of findings are consistent with the possibility that emotion dysregulation is kind of a key trait factor of people who are prone to nightmares. And and I just wanted to mention that other comment that more generally, it does seem from this research that nightmares and nightmare-prone individuals fit within this framework, this diathesis stress framework, that people who are prone to nightmares have a trait which makes them more vulnerable to kind of negative outcomes when exposed to waking life stress and when experiencing nightmares. And in my work in Rochester, I've kind of looked more at other clinical implications of nightmares. So that nightmares are a risk factor to developing worse psychopathology. So for instance, people who are exposed to trauma, if they have nightmares either prior to the trauma or even after the trauma, they're more likely to develop PTSD. And then people who do have PTSD, if they have replicative nightmares, they have much higher suicide risk. And more generally, it seems like treating nightmares and being aware of nightmares in clinical psychology can be an important kind of avenue for intervention, especially if we know how to treat nightmares, which I'll talk about later. So this was my work in my PhD, but as you can see, this research is kind of limited to studying nightmare sufferers under conditions of adversity, looking at exposure to negative stimuli and stressful conditions. And it's kind of, it just supports this evidence for negative outcomes associated with nightmare pathology, but it doesn't really examine or explore anything about positive contexts or what we would expect to observe under positive conditions. So my postdoc was really focused on expanding the neurocognitive model and using a new framework called differential susceptibility and trying to look at possible upside of being someone who is prone to nightmares. And this is the work that was funded by the Borella Award. So in 2017, we published this framework called a differential susceptibility framework for nightmares. And the figure is very similar to diathesis stress, except for this upper right quadrant here. So differential susceptibility traits are considered for better and for worse traits. So while you do expect the negative outcomes associated with adversity or stressful waking life experiences, you also expect positive and kind of adaptive and advantageous traits and outcomes in these same individuals. And over the years of studying nightmares, our group and other groups have found evidence that doesn't necessarily fit just in that diathesis stress framework. And that's what led us to publish this model. And specifically, we suggest that there's this trait, it's called sensory processing sensitivity, or you can just call them a highly sensitive trait. And that people who are highly sensitive might be more prone to experiencing nightmares. And being highly sensitive essentially means you are more reactive to negative experiences, but also you have more positive emotional reactivity. And one way of thinking about that is just that the whole environment, your whole experience essentially becomes more salient. If you're slightly more emotional in response to everything, then you have deeper processing of the environment, deeper awareness of sensory stimuli, and this can be an advantageous thing at times. So when we published the model, we were mapping kind of the profile of nightmare sufferers onto the existing highly sensitive literature. And there was a bunch of findings that kind of corresponded with this. So in my study, for instance, we found enhanced semantic associativity, which is similar to a measure of creativity. Others found higher curiosity and reward seeking in nightmare sufferers. There's higher empathy and mirror behaviors, so social sensitivity, and increased perceptual sensitivity. So these are all existing behavioral findings. And then there's also evidence from imagery, from dreams and imagination. And it's kind of nice to add this to the existing literature on what it is to be highly sensitive, because it suggests that when you're highly sensitive to the external environment, you also have kind of this amplified process of internal imagery generation. So your internal environment is also very, very vivid and intensified. So we've shown evidence of more positive sensation in dreams, more positive and bizarre daydreams, increased sensory vividness, more social interactions in dreams. Nightmare sufferers just have very high dream recall in general. So most of their dreams are not nightmares. They mostly have neutral or even positive and even vivid, intense positive dreams, such as lucid dreams and archetypal dreams, which are these big, sometimes transcendent dream experiences. Yeah, so they don't just have nightmares. There's more to the picture. So this was the study I ran as a postdoc. It was funded by the Varela Award, testing differential susceptibility. We had 27 nightmare subjects and 27 control subjects. They answered a bunch of questionnaires, nightmare distress and frequency, the highly sensitive person scale, interpersonal reactivity, which is social sensitivity, well-being and attitude toward dreams. And they completed a few tasks, another emotional task, which was recorded with neuroimaging, and daily dream and mood diaries for between 4 and 8 weeks. And then we also did some Dreamwork sessions with them, which I'll talk about in detail. So first, our questionnaire results. They revealed some support that nightmare subjects, they did score higher on the highly sensitive person scale, which is good because otherwise that would have just, countered the hypothesis right off the beginning. So they are more highly sensitive. That's good. They also tended to score higher on empathy, but of course they also have higher distress and lower well-being levels. So kind of upsides and downsides to being someone prone to nightmares. For the emotional task with neuroimaging, we did essentially the same task as what I had done in Montreal, except in this case, there were blocks where they were looking at negative images and then other blocks where they were looking at positive images. And basic effect is that nightmare subjects, which are the red bars, they subjectively rate as having higher emotional arousal in response to both the negative images and the positive images. So it doesn't seem to be specific to negative stimuli. For neuroimaging, we used near-infrared spectroscopy, which is, there's like 8 optodes on the forehead, essentially, which are just emitting infrared light into the cortex. And it measures changes in blood flow based on how it detects the light scattering in the frontal pole. And we did partially replicate the finding from Montreal, that is, people who had higher bad dream distress had less activation in these frontal regions during the negative arousal task, so less regulation of negative arousal, it seems like. But we didn't see any effect during positive picture viewing. So it's possible this neural trait is kind of specific to negative emotion dysregulation. Okay, so we also, as I said, had people keep dream diaries for up to 8 weeks, and they were recording their dreams in the morning and then also recording their daily mood, how positive and negative they felt in the morning. And then we did a text analysis on all of the dream reports, and these are the results. So the initial finding, which has been shown several times, is that having more anxiety, so more negative emotion in your dreams, is associated with a worse mood in the morning. And we also showed the opposite, that having more positive emotion in your dreams is associated with a more positive mood in the morning, which is the green bar. And through text analysis, we were able to look at some other features of dream content that correlate with mood. So in personal concerns, if your dreams had more references to death, then you're having a more negative mood in the morning, whereas dreams about leisure or money were more positive. Finding money is actually a typical positive dream theme that we sometimes see. And then looking at characters in dreams, it seemed like having more I pronouns was associated with more negative mood, whereas more we pronouns were associated with more positive mood. So potentially kind of a benefit of having more social content in your dreams. And this is relevant when we think about how to treat and intervene with nightmares. And I'll give a couple of examples. So here's one example of a nightmare. Okay. So I was walking along the beach and it was raining lightly. The sun was setting over the ocean and I thought this was weird as it was setting in the south and as I for some reason felt it was the middle of the day still. I watched the sunset until the sun was gone completely. Suddenly it was very dark. There were no visible stars, I couldn't see the moon, and there weren't any streetlights. I didn't know which direction to walk in to avoid ending up in the sea. I started walking but slipped over and ended up in the water. I tried to swim to the surface, but I couldn't figure out which way to go, so just went what I thought was upwards. My lungs were burning and I couldn't reach the surface. Everything was still dark and I felt dizzy and I felt my eyes close and I'm fairly certain I died. So you can see a lot of the themes I was talking about. It's obviously a very negative dream, but it's also, there's a lot of really intense negative body sensations in the dream. You see this pattern of kind of building negative arousal, that the dream is gradually becoming more overwhelming, and it's an increasingly negative dream theme. And then there's also a lot of I pronouns. So the dreamer is alone in this dream. And it was associated with a very negative mood on awakening. And here's an example of a positive dream. So my family and I went to this amazing sightseeing place. It was on the top of a massive mountain. So when you looked out, it looked like it was the edge of the earth. You could see the stars in the darkness above the clouds, and the clouds were pink and orange, and they were falling off the mountain like a waterfall. It was so stunning. We then went on a helicopter ride, and it took off over the edge of the mountain, and there was nothing beneath you. I got the same feeling you get on a scary roller coaster, and like my stomach was in my mouth. I felt happy when I woke up. So here we have kind of a very rich, it's very vivid in sensation, very aesthetic and positive dream experience. And there is some use of we pronouns and even you pronouns, kind of a more social or even less egocentric kind of experience of a dream, and associated with a very positive mood on awakening. Okay. So finally, we also did Dreamwork with participants. So Dreamwork is just a word for when you kind of have discussions and interact with your dream imagery in waking life. So a subset of participants did this, and we had two conditions. One was focusing oriented dream work. And some of you may be familiar with Eugene Genlin's work. He's a philosopher turned psychologist who developed this technique called focusing, which is essentially trying to attend to what he calls a felt sense of experience, and kind of getting beneath our conceptual knowledge or conceptual language and trying to tune into what our body is feeling. And this can be applied to working with dreams. And so when we use this technique for dream work, initially we start with what's called clearing a space. And it's essentially just kind of grounding yourself in the present moment, relaxing, and just trying to let go of other things that may be distracting you, so that you can just kind of see what comes with the dream. And the dreamer tells their dream in detail, and then the experimenter asks a bunch of questions, really focusing on physical sensations, feelings, and the felt sense. What is the dreamer's felt sense of this dream? And then we can explore different aspects of the dream. So the experimenter will ask the dreamer to try on different perspectives. So when you first tell the dream, you might be telling it from the first person perspective, but then you can ask them to view the dream from a third person perspective, and what is the felt sense that comes when you view it from this kind of outside stance. And then you can even embody other characters in the dream. So if somebody's threatening you and you embody that character and you observe the dream from that perspective, what is the felt sense there? And from this, you can then do what's called dreaming the dream forward, or trying to continue the dream in some way. From this, you have kind of a new felt sense that arises from working with the dream. And you essentially just ask the dreamer, hold on to this new felt sense that you have and see if the dream can continue. And this is actually kind of common in nightmare therapies, that you ask a dreamer, if they're having a recurring nightmare, you ask them to come up with a new ending for a nightmare, and resolve the nightmare, come up with a different way for the dream to end. The difference with focusing is you're not like creating it cognitively, you're trying to allow it to arise through this felt sense, kind of spontaneously. And then the other condition was compassion-based dream work. And again, the participant quickly tells the dream and finds kind of an energetic portion where they're drawn to kind of a central image, if you will. And then they actually did a 20-minute guided meditation while they were lying in the bedroom. And it goes through breathing and bodily relaxation. And at the end of the 20 minutes is when they bring that image that they had selected, they bring it into their mind. And they're encouraged to observe it kind of from the outside, like rather than being in the image, trying to observe it from a more third-person perspective. And even to attempt to generate compassion toward the dream, so at least trying to observe it from a place without fear, and if possible, generate compassion toward the dream, and then see if it shifts, see how the dream changes. So a couple examples. This participant had a bad dream where she was trapped in a prison cell, and the prison cell had black and white floor tiles. And on the opposite wall, there was a drawer that was slowly opening as if it was haunted. And the dreamer had a really intense feeling of fear and was frozen in fear. So during the Dreamwork session, she says, I feel like if there were other people in the room, I'd feel better. I could hold their hands and I wouldn't be on my own. It just feels safer with other people. And then spontaneously, the image changes. So she says, oh, the drawers are going back on their own now. We're not pushing them. We're just kind of standing there holding hands. And it feels a bit like when a room stretches, goes longer. It feels like that's quite powerful. It's like winning. And I can see the floor tiles, dark tile, light tile, checkered. I can see more of that as it's going away. And the fear is going away and it's replaced with, wow, this is working. I feel calmer and I feel lighter in the sense of weight, but also light as in I would be a different shade of, it's gone from gray to shades of blue. I'm like a pale blue now. So she kind of decides to recruit some positive social support in this image, but then the dream spontaneously shifts and her whole, like the whole dream ending changes, and she feels relieved and calm at the end of it. And then in an example from the other condition, this is the compassion-based condition. This participant had a recurring nightmare of being trapped in the corner of a dark alley, and a threatening man was approaching her, and she was trapped in this corner. So when she was doing the dream work, she recalled the dream and first imagined it from a third-person perspective. So rather than being in the dream, she was observing it from the outside. And just from looking at the image that way, she noticed that there's a red fire escape on the wall of the alley, and she had never seen that before when she was in the dream. So she decides she's going to try to escape up the fire escape, and she goes up 2 steps. But then, of course, there's that prompt to try to kind of face the dream image from a place without fear, from a place of compassion, potentially. So she looks down and she faces the man, and he simply turns around and walks away. There's no confrontation, no interaction at all. He just, from that place of being slightly higher than him, looking down on him and not being afraid, he just turns around and walks away. And this was a recurring nightmare that she had experienced for many years, that just kind of spontaneously resolved through this session. Oh, so I have some preliminary results. This slide isn't very pretty because I just did these analyses 2 days ago, but there's some interesting results, so I thought I would share them with you. When looking first at the questionnaire measures and seeing how did Dreamwork affect people, we first measured the questionnaires at baseline, and then after 3 sessions of Dreamwork, they responded to the questions again. And the only change we saw was an increase in attitude toward dreams. So this is items, I'll give you an example. So items like reflecting on dreams. Through reflecting on dreams, I'm able to learn more about myself, or I have the impression that dreams provide impulses or pointers for waking life. So this actually, it initially increased from before to after the Dreamwork sessions, but then we had another measure a month later, a follow-up, and attitude toward dreams decreased again, kind of back to baseline levels. And so initially from baseline to post sessions, we didn't see any change in dream anxiety, but then when we measured at follow-up, we did see that both the nightmare subjects and the control subjects showed a decrease in dream anxiety after these sessions. And we had some measures of actual experience during the Dreamwork sessions. So experiencing is items like I was able to re-experience the feelings I had in my dream. I felt like I was actually reliving my dream during the session. And having high levels of experiencing correlated with the changes in attitude towards dreams. So led to an initial boost in attitude toward dreams, which then decreased. And then action is items like I have more of a sense that I can change my dreams when they are frightening, or I got ideas for how to change some aspects of myself or my life based on the session. And exploration is I learned how past events influence my present behavior. I learned about my waking life through these sessions. So these both correlated with decreased dream anxiety from the post session to the follow-up. So those are some new findings that are pretty interesting and promising. Okay, and final slide of this section. So on the one hand, we do find, similar to the neurocognitive model, we find some evidence of this kind of downward spiral, vicious cycle between nightmares and nightmare distress and emotion dysregulation. And from the neuroimaging results, we also think that emotion dysregulation at a neural level is something that's specific to negative context. So it's kind of a downside, that diathesis stress aspect of being prone to nightmares. And then on the upside, we also see that nightmare subjects are highly sensitive. They have increased positive emotional arousal, subjectively increased empathy. And there's some kind of like opposite to how nightmares can cause distress, positive dreams can also cause positive mood. And then there's some benefits of actually working with nightmares and with imagery. And specifically, some of the targets then of treating nightmares can be first regulating negative emotion and perhaps doing that through that third person perspective, kind of giving yourself a bit of distance from the negative emotion in a nightmare. And then trying to kind of introduce novel elements, shift a nightmare script, dream a dream forward, have a new resolution to a nightmare. And then this can kind of boost mood and give you more agency and a more positive attitude towards dreams. So if I have time, I had one more really short section about current work on lucid dreaming and dream engineering. Okay. So first, to define a lucid dream, this is a dream where you know that you're dreaming while you're still asleep. And here's one example from one of my subjects. I was learning to drive with my previous instructor, and there was another instructor in the car. I remember feeling frustrated because my feet could not move to press the pedals, and the car started to slow down. At this point, I realized I was dreaming because this is a recurring dream I've had before, and I recognized it. After realizing it was a dream, I stopped the car and got out, and the dream ended with my getting out of the car. So you can see in this, kind of similar to dream work, that lucid dreaming can help with treating nightmares or changing responses to nightmares. So the participant has this insight, they realize that this is just a bad dream, and then they decide to change how they respond to the dream, and then they wake up, and it's a more positive dream experience than it would have been otherwise. So some of my work has looked at this so-called spectrum of lucid dreaming, because a lot of people think of lucid dreams as kind of an all or nothing phenomenon, that you're either fully lucid or you're not. But actually, there's really the spectrum of variations of awareness and insight and variations in control that you can experience during dreaming. So not at all lucid dream would be, I believed it was reality when I was dreaming and had no doubt it wasn't, or the dream led me to do what it wanted and not the other way around. And then you could be kind of moderately lucid. So although I was not fully aware, I believe I was able to make decisions. Or in other participants, that I wasn't aware I was dreaming, but I was able to change stuff. So there's some level of control or some level of agency that you have in the dream. And then a fully lucid dream would be, I was completely aware that I was dreaming and managed to change everything that was happening. So that's very lucid. But importantly, what we've shown in a couple studies, and maybe I'll just explain the scatter plot here, is that there seems to be a stepwise relationship between how lucid you are and how positive the dream and the waking experiences, or your mood after this dream. And this is good because it suggests you don't need to be fully lucid to have some benefits of training in lucid dreaming and learning to have more agency and awareness in your dreams. That just becoming a little bit more lucid can be helpful for your experience in the dream and for how you feel after awakening. So you have a more positive mood. And finally, in the realm of dream engineering, this is kind of using techniques and technologies to influence dreaming as it's occurring. So I've been working on lucid dream techniques using sensory stimulation. So for instance, using cues like flashing LED light or a beeping sound. And we essentially train people while they're awake to associate these sensory cues with kind of a mental state of lucidity. So when they notice these cues, they're supposed to remember that they're dreaming, or remember to question whether they're dreaming or not, and kind of have increased awareness of what they're experiencing. So then we represent these cues while they're in REM sleep, and ideally the cues get incorporated into a dream and trigger lucidity. So here's an example. The participant says, I was shopping in a supermarket and I was just putting things in my cart and I could hear the beeping. It was like I was getting loads of messages on my phone telling me what to buy. Things like buy some biscuits. I only remembered the lights once. There's clear lights in the shop that flickered. So these cues are getting incorporated into her dream, and she realizes that those are the cues from the experimenter. This is a dream I'm experiencing. And she could then choose how to act in the dream. And interestingly, it does seem like nightmare subjects are more sensitive to this protocol, perhaps because of that sensory processing sensitivity that I talked about, that they are getting these cues are incorporated into their dream more than control subjects, for example. So that's a potential dream engineering approach to treating nightmares. I've also been working a lot with Adam Horowitz and others at the MIT Media Lab. So Adam's developed this Dormio device, which you've maybe heard of. And it basically is just this glove that it detects when you fall asleep based on changes in muscle tension in your hand, and a couple other factors. And we've done a study recently where he just uses it to give the dreamer a prompt as they're falling asleep, like, remember to dream about this. And you do this kind of over and over again, just in one session. You kind of fall asleep and it prompts you to dream about something, and then you wake up and report it. And what he showed in this recent study is that just doing one session of this Dormio technique, it can shift people's kind of attitude toward dreams or sense of agency, how much they feel like they're able to influence their dreams. And he's also showed that this is especially effective in nightmare sufferers, that often people who have frequent nightmares feel like they're completely at the mercy of their nightmares. They have no control over what they're dreaming about. And doing a simple technique like this can just show you, actually, you do have some influence over what you're dreaming. You can, in some instances, choose how to dream, choose how to engage with your dreams. So it could just be kind of a tool to learn about your influence over the dreaming world. And I just want to mention, some people kind of have a suspicion about dream control, and maybe is that really something we want to encourage, controlling your dreams? And when I talk about dream control, I don't really view it as like fully controlling the dream environment. It's really much more how I've talked about waking dream work and in lucid dreaming, that you have a sense of agency. You can control yourself, you can control your reactions to things a little bit. You can set some intentions on what you want to do in the dream, but you still have to kind of be open to what the dream is bringing, that the dream is still generating things completely independently. And so there's still this kind of interaction between me as an agent in the dream and the dream as just kind of a creative generation of its own. So I kind of view it more as an intentional improvisation, that you're interacting with the dream in an intentional way, but you're listening to what it brings as well. Oh, I had one more slide. Okay. So just to come back to the neurocognitive model, talking about how treatments and how lucid dreaming can interact with this neurocognitive model of nightmares. In theory, when you become lucid, you have this insight, and that gives you a bit of distance from the negative emotion of a dream. It tells you, oh, this is a dream. I'm actually asleep in my bed. I'm safe. And it gives you, it might help you to regulate your negative emotion in the dream, just the insight into the fact that you're dreaming. And then, of course, you can choose what to do in the dream through control. So you can change, if you have a recurring nightmare, you can change it in some way, and you can make it more positive, and then that could improve your mood. And so what I would like to do next is to essentially do a study looking at whether inducing lucid dreams actually changes at all your emotion regulation, either increases frontal activation during REM sleep or changes emotion regulation after sleep. That's where I would like to go next. And just summarizing everything. Yeah, so at the beginning, I talked about how dreams seem to incorporate waking life experience and reflect memory, consolidation, and emotion processing functions of sleep and potentially dreams. Nightmares seem to be triggered by adversity and may, in their recurring nature, they may reflect some failure to integrate negative experiences, and they're also associated with impaired negative emotion regulation. But nightmare-prone individuals are also highly sensitive to positive experience, and they have a variety of intensified imagery, including very vivid positive dream experiences that can be adaptive and boost mood. And nightmare treatments can aim to kind of regulate negative emotion first, and then also change a nightmare and create a more positive dream experience and boost mood and attitude towards dreams. So that is the end. I just want to say thank you again for inviting me and for supporting my research. I have some of my other funders and mentors and labs here. The Dream Science Foundation has supported a lot of my work as well. And yeah, I'm very grateful to be able to do what I do as a researcher. It's very fun to study dreams and to study sleep. And thank you for listening. I'm happy to share it with you. And I will also just leave my references up for a moment while I'm happy to take questions as well. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle, for this absolutely fascinating deep dive into the world of nightmares and their treatment. I think we will have plenty of questions. I know we already have one in the chat. So I would like to start out by inviting Anna Maria. If you're able to unmute yourself, maybe you can just share your question with us. And if you're not, just give me a sign and I can read it out loud for us to hear. Okay, maybe not. So in the chat, Anna Maria, yeah, okay, so she's not able to unmute, no problem. So in the chat, she said, thank you for the excellent talk. It was very fascinating. And my question pertains to sleep paralysis. People can become lucid while in sleep paralysis, but the issue in sleep paralysis is not being able to have control or agency in the dream until you are released by the dream. Do you know how sleep paralysis affects our daily life and or neurocognitive health? Is it also related partly to emotional regulation, or is it purely a problem of perturbations in sleep-wake cycles?
Excellent question. Yeah, that comes up a lot because people who are, when they're learning to lucid dream, sometimes have a fear of getting into sleep paralysis, because sleep paralysis is it's like a mixed, kind of a hybrid state between being asleep, but also you start to wake up, you kind of consciously start to wake up, but your body is still paralyzed like it is in REM sleep. And just for people who don't know, then you can have very frightening experiences where you might think that somebody's kind of holding you down, or you might think that somebody's threatening you in your actual bedroom. And there has been some work relating this to anxiety, and particularly that having those very frightening hallucinations in sleep paralysis, where you think there's an intruder and you think somebody is threatening you, that is related to kind of socially anxious imagery and related to social anxiety in waking life. But I think it also more generally is just a physiological thing. It happens kind of at the border between REM sleep and waking up. It happens more when you're sleep deprived or when you have a disturbed sleep cycle. It happens a lot to people who have narcolepsy. It's kind of they fall into REM sleep very quickly and often have sleep paralysis experiences. But you can actually use lucid dreaming techniques to try to overcome the negative hallucinations that frequently occur in sleep paralysis. So rather than, if you become aware that you're in the throes of sleep paralysis, it sometimes becomes more frightening when you try to fully wake up and come out of sleep. And sometimes instead, if you can just through lucid awareness, just try to calm your breathing and try to relax and actually go back into sleep. So you fall further asleep, you can use that to become lucid in a dream. So you maintain your conscious awareness as you fall asleep, and gradually a new dream appears. It's kind of a cool experience. Let's see if I answered all of those parts of the questions. There still isn't too much research though on like how sleep paralysis affects daily life. And I would be interested in studying people who are very frequently have sleep paralysis experiences. So there's not too much research on it. It's kind of a relatively understudied phenomenon compared to nightmares. Yeah.
Great. And Maria, if you want to make any comments in the chat, feel free if you have anything to follow up with. She just made a quick comment. I've had many experiences and also study cognitive neuroscience and I'm interested. Okay, great. Thank you for the wonderful question. Wolfgang, I see you have a question. Would you like to unmute yourself or shall we read it? Read it out loud.
Yes, I'll be happy to read it. Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Michelle, for what a wonderful research and presentation. I'm very excited. I want to ask you something, and I apologize if you mentioned it already in the talk and I missed it. Could you help delineate for us between bad dreams and nightmares? And I would give an example. For instance, I sometimes have a dream where I'm getting lost, for instance, in an airport, and it becomes this enormous labyrinth, and I'm just trying to get along, but ultimately I'm anxious about missing a flight. And so would that classify, or how would it depend on whether it classifies as a bad dream or a nightmare? Anyway, any insights that you could share, please? Thank you very much.
Yes, I did mean to mention this in my talk, but I forgot to, so perfect question. So in research, we most often use the categorical difference that bad dreams are negative dreams where they don't wake you up, whereas nightmares are so overwhelming and really physiologically arousing. When you're experiencing a nightmare, really like your heart is racing, your breath rate is really quick, and you really have these sudden awakenings that are driven by a combination of physiological arousal and also just psychologically overwhelming emotion that you just can't stay asleep. So that's kind of, we try to make this categorical distinction, but the reality is there, like anything, it's much more of a continuum. And some people, I mean, there are differences between the two in the literature, that bad dreams more often, they have more positive components, like in your example of the trying to get to a flight, which is a very typical universal bad dream that people have. You might have some elements that are positive, like maybe like at some point you're like, oh, I think I'm going to make it. And then something negative happens and something else gets in your way. There's another obstacle. So bad dreams seem to have at least more little elements of positivity in them, like maybe some feeling of reaching a goal, and then the bad dream might continue. Whereas nightmares are really predominantly only negative. They don't have to be fearful. They could also be, you can have grief dreams that are nightmares. Yeah, other types of, you can have anger dreams where you're so overwhelmingly angry that you just wake up with a start. So yeah, so there seems to be some differences, but it is also more continuous, that sometimes you have bad dreams that are really intensely negative, but just don't lead to an awakening. Or sometimes some people have nightmares and they wake up and they're not distressed by them at all. They wake up and they're like, oh, that was just a dream, I don't care, so it's more complex than just two categories. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question, Wolfgang. And Bruce, I see you've got a question in the chat. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michelle. I must admit, I enjoyed your presentation today, and having watched your TEDx talk in 2019, I felt that it added a lot of the research under the actual research detail that went into what was a more general talk. So I was enjoying that. I wanted to tease out something a little bit more, if you were willing to. Obviously, you've been working on nightmares, and your nightmares have been connected to traumatic events, negative emotions. But of course, you're in a psychiatry department, so you know that nightmares are diagnostic of PTSD anyway. So the question is, the chicken and the egg, is it the PTSD? Is it the survival mechanisms of fight, flight, and freezing that underlie this as they turn into social consequences of anger, anxiety, and depression, and then represent themselves symbolically in the dream? So maybe, and I appreciate that you have been working from that negative point and working with nightmares. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on what contribution your and your colleagues' empirical work on nightmares has added to a theoretical conceptual framework which describes dreams and nightmares as both a conscious experience and a phenomenal state during sleep, which locates dreams and nightmares relative to other concepts of the mind, such as perception, hallucination, and the one I'm particularly interested in, imagination and creativity, because it would seem to be, and of course self-consciousness, but it would seem that childhood experiences, which you showed, were adverse childhood experiences which were associated with increased nightmares. When the nightmares were reproduced at a later stage, generally suggests that these experiences have been suppressed into the unconscious and are then being presented symbolically to the conscious mind, although in the form of a dream consciousness where it's safer to explore them. So and whether that exploration is being carried out by the use of a third level of the mind, imagination and creativity, going forward, which you are utilizing as a treatment for the nightmares. But I wonder if you would consider that within a wider concept of the mind functioning through the neurocognitive system, and going forward as an opportunity for unconscious experiences to be presented safely, for creativity and imagination to resolve these conflicts at a date distant from the original. Sorry, very long-winded, but I would love your thoughts on that if you didn't.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer so much as, you know, while you were speaking, I have a few ideas that popped up that I think are relevant. So kind of, I personally am very interested in how we just how our experience is across waking and dreaming life. I mean, I focus on dreams and on nightmares because in a way, to me, it's a more accurate depiction of what our experience is like all the time. Like even when we're in waking life, we tend to think of our experience as these episodes. Like if I recounted what was happening right now, I would describe this episode kind of visually and narratively, which is also how we report dreams. But the experience that I'm having is obviously much more complex. I'm experiencing a lot of things in my body. I'm experiencing cognitions. I'm kind of mind wandering, and there's all sorts of different things going on in my experience right now. And in dreaming, I feel like we see that more authentically. And we see the ways that in a nightmare, for example, if I start to feel, if I'm, you know, in a situation in a nightmare where a character looks at me and I feel for some reason threatened, my feeling of fear actually directs the dream. So then the character becomes even more threatening. And it's this kind of way of seeing the way that the way that I perceive the entire world, be it the dream world or the waking world, is driven a lot by my internal experience, by my internal affect and my sensations and my habits and my reactions. And yeah, Stephen LaBerge has a quote about dreaming just being, we're unconstrained by the perceptual constants of the waking world. So in the waking world, if I have a reaction to someone and I'm threatened by them, it doesn't actually change that person. So if that person decides to be welcoming or nice to me, then that kind of constrains my experience. Whereas in the dreaming world, my experience actually creates the world around me. So I feel like you can see more genuinely who I am and how I experience the world and how I create the world and how I perceive the world. That your emotions and your feelings really dictate what you perceive. I don't know if that answered the question at all, but another related idea that came up was talking about imagination and daydreaming. Ernest Hartman was another nightmare researcher, and he was very interested in imagination and creativity. And he talked about daymares. So having kind of, you're daydreaming and it turns into a really negative experience. And people who have nightmares are more prone to experiencing these as well. And he would do this when he would give a presentation. Sometimes he would do this interactive experience with the audience, where he would kind of have you start daydreaming about something and then allow yourself to really feel a negative emotion, allow yourself to really feel fear and see what happens to your imagination. And he could show that, like, when you're really feeling a negative emotion, your mind really runs with it. Your daydream, your imagination, it gets really vivid and intense and really responds to what you're experiencing. So it was kind of, he just used it to show the way that, and this I think leans into like how it's related, how dreaming is related to psychiatry, that you can see the ways that our mind can kind of get away from us in waking life and in dreaming as well. I have another note here, but I don't know what I meant to say about it. Oh, you were talking about early childhood adverse experiences triggering nightmares and then them being reactivated later in life. I mean, this is, yeah, it's incredibly fascinating that this happens. I mean, another really, really common one is people have the dream of being late for an exam or something. People will experience this their entire life. And I don't know exactly how it works, but I feel again like it's, and this is probably just my bias, but I feel again like it's related to this concept of like a felt sense, that this image or that this dream theme is really encapsulating some experience that you're having in your body, and it really symbolizes and metaphorically represents something for you, and is triggered whenever you experience something in waking life that's similar to that felt sense. So even if another example, like maybe when you were very young, you had an experience of falling, and now you have falling dreams whenever, but the falling dreams might happen because you're falling again. It might happen because you have a sense of failing or something like that. And it's kind of embodying this, symbolically embodying a felt sense that you're experiencing. And then sometimes it's just more, it's even more literal than that. I mean, people have dreams of their teeth falling out. That's a very typical bad dream theme. But recently some research suggests that it happens in people who grind their teeth. So it's just a very literal body sensation. Even though grinding your teeth is related to waking life anxiety and stress, but that the dream itself is just representing a very literal sensation of your jaw grinding. So that's kind of interesting too. I don't know, did that answer?
No,
was that related?
Great answer. You brought up 3 points, and have I enough time, Gabor, to maybe just explore a little more? Yeah. Okay, the second and third points relate very directly to long-standing psychological therapy, particularly Jungian psychotherapy. For example, words are a form of symbolism, and because we are very familiar with words, falling, is an example. Falling down is a phenomenal example of a concept of failing. So in my original question, I referred both to conscious experience and a phenomenal state during sleep. And there's no doubt that is the case. When I was talking about childhood or earlier experiences that have been suppressed, often because the mind considered that they were unsafe or unable to deal with them at the time. But when these are laid down, they are laid down both through memory, long-term memory, and also through the salience network, so that the emotion that was experienced at the time is also saved along with the memory of the experience, even though these become unconscious. But when they are represented to the conscious mind, either during a conscious sleep experience, dreaming, or indeed during a cathartic episode with a psychotherapist, the emotion that was experienced originally always comes back up with the experience to be explored. So this is an important link with the emotion. So basically, what you were answering in the second and third part of my question there relates basically to what psychological therapy, not CBT, but psychotherapy and depth psychology, going back probably for nearly 100 years. And the other thing you brought up was the relationship to perception, and I know I wanted to make another point on that, but I'm the one having the failing memory at the moment. It's Oh, oh yes, it was in relation to lucid dreaming. You were talking about using, I've lucid dreamed for nearly 20 years now, all ranges of experience, right through from archetypal to full control. It has always been in the back of my mind that, as you said, our waking reality consists of perceptual limitations according to what we consider to be social norms of reality, which is released during sleep, so that we have the opportunity to explore these perceptual inputs without the social boundaries that we have during waking experience. My concern is, and that's a wonderful opportunity to explore unpleasant experiences and look at them with different outcomes. My concern with lucid dreaming, and as I say, I'm a practitioner and I love it, is that the more we reinstitute a conscious waking control, the more we limit the perceptual belief systems and actually prevent ourselves from exploring more freely in the dream, because we feel that we can only explore in certain directions. So it's just a thought on the relationship between dreaming and perception in lucid dreaming. And I will give the time back over to everybody else now. Thank you once again.
Yeah, those are all interesting points. To that last point, there is, of course, in the lucid dreaming literature, a lot about how your expectations kind of can create your lucid dream experience, and that can be limiting, as you're suggesting. But I think also a lot of the techniques are like, you just ask a question into the dream and see what happens. So not really trying to control the dream so much as just putting a little bit of intention into the dream and seeing what arises. But it is a good question to know whether that's still just having that kind of increased level of consciousness or cognitive control, if that's still limiting it somehow in a way that's higher than in normal dreams. I'm not really sure. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that very briefly, without going into lucid dreaming, I regularly will drop a question into a period of insight meditation, drop it in. And then I find that my unconscious mind decides to answer it for me that night in a dream. Lucid dream, but you know, when you are anticipating, or when you are looking for information, your unconscious mind is actually your best friend, in that it wants to help you find the answer. And so I get my answers in dreams from questions I've asked during the day.
Yeah, that's a form of dream incubation. Yeah. And that happens too in the hypnagogic state or the sleep onset state. You see that happening a lot, and it's I mean, I haven't studied it scientifically, but just personally, seeing how when I ask a question, how my unconscious will answer sometimes, like with a song lyric will suddenly pop up into my head that's somehow related to what I was thinking about, or a pun or a quote or a memory. And it's interesting to kind of witness what I think is similar to the process of dream generation, but it can occur in other states like meditation or sleep onset. And it's interesting to try to work with that intentionally. So
yeah,
fascinating stuff.
I'm a clinician, and I've worked on insomnia treatment going back over nearly 10 years now. And as you probably know, insomnia tends to be treated by hypnotic medication or CBT. Actually, at Aberdeen University, my wife and I, who was co-researcher, developed a technique of using mindfulness meditation to assist as a straight the way over the counter for GPs on somebody coming in who didn't have to wait for drugs or to get a CBT appointment for sleep onset insomnia. And it worked very well. We ran a clinical trial, and I presented the research finding at the Mind and Life International Congress of Contemplative Science 2014, 2016, 2018, it can be found there. But the most interesting thing was that, as you know, there is also sleep maintenance insomnia, which is the early morning waking of depression, anxiety, where you wake at 2 or 3 in the morning and start ruminating and can't get back to sleep. What we found was that the patients, as they were in this stage, not clients, were so impressed with the sleep onset insomnia that instead of getting up and making a cup of tea, they stayed in bed, practiced the mindfulness meditation, and it also proved to be very effective for sleep maintenance insomnia. So there is a very definite link between meditation as a state of consciousness, and then that goes back to my question, about dreams and nightmares as conscious experience, as conscious lived experience, which is probably the basis of any theoretical conceptual framework that we're all trying to develop.
Yeah, that's fascinating. There was a study just recently that used lucid dreaming techniques for insomnia and found some improvement as well, and suggested similar to mindfulness. I mean, lucid dreaming training is usually just a pre-sleep kind of intention setting, and to me, it is kind of a meditation that you're kind of practicing awareness and setting the intention to remember to become lucid. And doing these kind of lucid dreaming techniques led to improvement in insomnia symptoms, potentially through practicing this in the sleep onset state, reducing rumination, but also maybe having slightly more positive dreams and more positive just mental experiences across the night. Yeah, it's another thing I'd want to study.
Yeah, my colleague Charlie Morley, who you read his work on lucid dreaming, actually started that at Aberdeen University around about 2010, because the two of us actually had the same mindfulness meditation teacher. And
well, Charlie developed the compassion Dreamwork that I talked about for this study. The 20-minute meditation with recalling a nightmare image, that was Charlie Morley developed that. So
yeah,
we worked together too.
That's been running concurrently out of Sammy Ling and Aberdeen in Scotland, as I say, since about 2010.
Nice.
Thank you for this really, really intricate and interesting exchange. We do have a couple more questions I'd really like for us to get to, because they're both good questions. And the first one came from Aida, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. She's asking for just a bit of advice with someone in her MBCT group.
Exactly, you already said it. So I have a participant in an MBCT group from whom I know from the pre-course interview that she's suffering from nightmares. And she has been suffering over the last 14 years of weekly nightmares, kind of always the same topic, involving murder. And she's on my course now, and as long as she doesn't pinpoint it and brings it up herself, I wouldn't address the topic, obviously. So I just wanted to see if you have any advice for the MBCT course I'm leading.
I guess I'm not too familiar. Does the MBCT, does it go into like mindfulness around sleep at all, or
No,
okay?
No, not around sleep. Only participants bring it up.
Okay.
Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy.
Oh, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm not too familiar with it, but I would think, I mean, I don't know how much flexibility you have, but maybe in practicing these techniques around the sleep period, like before sleep or after awakening, might be helpful. But other than that, I'm not sure how much you can get into it if the participant doesn't bring it up,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think being aware of it is already helpful, and
Yeah.
maybe responding to her if she brings it up might be
Yeah.
helpful. Tell her something like, try to do body scan right when you wake up out of the dream, or maybe even find a way to spin another story whilst doing the body scan, or whilst doing a
Right.
meditation, whilst you're still in bed, something like this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If they bring it up, then yeah, that's always a good suggestion. Try to dream it forward, try to find a new resolution, even if, if they feel too aroused or too negative to actually work with the dream. You can just think of a different resolution and imagine it, and sometimes that can be helpful. And imagining, visualizing if it's a very recurring nightmare, visualizing a different ending repeatedly. It's training yourself essentially to dream this differently. So that's a helpful technique, I think, as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks for that.
One final comment there, that like in these kind of nightmare treatments and PTSD and recurring nightmares, sometimes somebody might have had a recurring nightmare for years or for decades, and then in a session of rescripting, sometimes it will resolve it and they might not have it anymore, or maybe it will transform and be a slightly different dream. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Do you have time to take one more question, Michelle?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting one. So Wolfgang, wanna deliver it?
It's a bit of an outlandish question, perhaps. I don't know. I wanted to ask you about anything that you would like to share, if anything, about shared dreams. Is there some research about shared dreams, as I think is reported by Aboriginal or other cultures as a even probably regular thing for them? But I don't know. I've never had shared dreams, but maybe you have some thoughts or insights related to that, and what might be connections to lucid dreams, perhaps, or other things, or has it come up in your research?
Yeah, I don't know about too much scientific research, but of course, yeah, I mean, the topic comes up a lot in the dream community, kind of the broader dream community that I'm a part of, trying to have shared dreams or study them in different cultures. But scientifically, I don't know that it's been studied or attempted to be studied. I do know in like the 80s, there was kind of a research program trying to explore these more outlandish topics that you're talking about. One of them, shared dreams or precognitive dreams. So dreaming about something that happens in the future, whether we can dream about things that happen in the future. And, the kind of conservative interpretation of that is just that we're incredible prediction machines, and we're going to dream about things that happen in the future, or they're things we're anticipating, or things that somehow we can predict. But then other explanations, I'm not a physicist, but I know that time doesn't work the way that I think it does. So there was potentially other explanations for how we could dream about things that are from the future, in the same way that we dream about things and incorporate things from the past. And then there was also a series of studies on dream telepathy. So trying to get information in a dream that somebody else is potentially transmitting or sending, or just information about another place. And so those have been scientifically studied, and I would say there's some studies that do find support for them, and then there's other studies that don't. And so it's still pretty controversial as a topic in dream research. But I don't actually know of any scientific studies on shared dreaming. So yeah, I don't know yet, but I'm curious about all of it, really.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for all these wonderful questions. I feel like we could have gone probably another hour discussing. I know I had questions that came up during the evening, but thank you so much for your time, Michelle, and for sharing your research trajectory and also the findings in a really detailed, substantive way. And I think we really all enjoyed that. And I'm sure everyone who'll be watching on YouTube was going to enjoy it too. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We just want to make everyone aware of the next 2 EVA alumni talks. So we'll have one per month. So in November 24th at the same time, 6 p.m. Central European time, we have Josipa Mihik, who'll be talking about her use of mindfulness in early childhood education and with teachers towards a caring and mindful schools model. And then in December, on December 8th, we have Nina Volberg, who will be talking about her study on yoga for depression, the effects and potential working mechanisms. So as you can see, these EVA alumni talks cover a really wide landscape of different topics, everything from nightmares to mindfulness to yoga for depression. So we hope you can join us for the next 2 talks to round up our season. Have a great evening, everyone, and thanks very much for joining.